Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you will hear part one of my conversation with Howard Wach, who recently retired as Provost of Guttman Community College. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I am your host, Jeff Yan. My guest today is Howard Wach. Howard retired in 2021 as the Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs at Guttman Community College, part of the CUNY system in New York. Previously, he held various other VP and Dean level positions at LaGuardia Community College and Bronx Community College. And then prior to that, he was a professor in history. Am I right, Howard?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so, welcome, Howard.
Thank you,
Uh,
Jeff.
yeah, we met a long time ago. You were one of the pioneers, one of the first people, at least for me, that really venture out of that, that my own initial institution when we were building the education, that I spoke with outside, and I learned so much. And that was what, like
Oh gosh, it
2009?
was I'm trying to think. It was maybe 2009. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
about right. Yeah, I think so.
it's
So
definitely over
that's
10 years. Yeah,
that's a while ago.
yeah. It is. It is. You had many titles before, before. I felt like I've seen your career just like skyrocket. I think it's me.
Yeah, no, I mean when I started working with Eportfolios and when you and I met, um, at that point I was still on the faculty, but I had moved into a kind of semi-administrative position. They created a title for me, basically Director of Instructional Technology at Bronx, and it was in that capacity that you and I met. I was in that capacity when we met, and we were able to get a portfolio program off the ground. And then subsequent to that, I moved in these different administrative directions.
Yeah. It's great to talk to a historian about, when we met because you recall everything. Um,
Well, there are some things I prefer not to recall, so I
that's,
blocked them out.
yeah, is that right? Um, so for that reason, you also have been doing e-portfolios and sort of watching that since pretty early times. I mean, I guess there were people that started even earlier, but I think ePortfolio wasn't very matured until until really like starting from around that time, that people started to have more sophisticated ways to really approach it and doing it at scale, which you did. Um,
Well, semi-scale, I would say.
yeah.
That's something, that's an interesting thing to talk about because it's it's a very difficult thing to do at scale. You know, I saw it from an administrator's angle, but I also saw it from a faculty angle. In part because I kind of had one foot in each place at that time, back in 2008, 2009, but also because of all of the work that I did with professional development to to help kind of bring faculty into the
Mhm.
portfolio world.
Right.
And so I got pretty familiar with the the paths that have to be followed for that to work. And they're challenging. They can be a big challenge.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Um, Now it's been a long time, since we met, since we started at Bronx Community College, and of course with both our friend Jordy Getman, who's
mhm.
still at Bronx
Yep.
today, doing
Mhm.
well. And But after after being at Bronx, you then moved to LaGuardia Community College, which is another sort of e-portfolio powerhouse.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and I know that there were a lot of people very involved in various many aspects of portfolios there as well. But then you also had picked up a lot of other responsibilities and subsequently became the provost at Guttman Community College.
right, right. Yeah,
Right.
LaGuardia was it had a very large portfolio program, which predated my time there by quite a lot. Um, and my responsibilities there were really directing the whole professional development structure that had been built up there over the years, and so it included lots and lots of different kinds of initiatives and administrative directions and faculty interests, portfolios being one of them, and being kind of in having a kind of a central role. But there were many other kinds of work that were going on there. Um, I think particularly about, and this was also something I was involved in at Bronx, the work to create an effective freshman year program for
Mhm.
community college students. I started to do that at BCC. I spent a year at BCC as the interim provost, and during that year, I was able to kind of kickstart uh, a first year seminar and put it into place there. Subsequently, after I had left Bronx, it continued. It showed good results and became institutionalized. I was really proud of that. And then when I came to LaGuardia, there was a similar sort of effort underway, and also ultimately became institutionalized. Um, and portfolios were involved in both of those efforts. Uh, they were part of both of those efforts, I would say.
Right.
The efforts themselves were broad, had lots of different dimensions to them, as they have to. Um,
Mhm.
so those were some highlights, I think, of the things I was involved in over the years.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't talk about Gutman yet because
No,
there's
not yet.
much more that you did there.
Yeah. Hmm.
But I think that it's interesting because we've been sort of looking back. I guess the reflective part of what we have to do for ourselves too, right? We look back and interestingly, we see that a vast majority of schools that use digication to any level of success almost always are not you doing portfolio alone. It's
Mm.
almost always portfolio, but in combination of first year seminars or first year experience or capstone or service learning or study abroad or oftentimes some kind of high impact practice or some kind of active learning type projects. you know that's kind of the playground. That's kind of where it hangs out.
Yeah,
um and it almost always is like part of that. It's not like it's actually almost never just alone.
yeah, that makes perfect sense, because it's a kind of an amplifier. The portfolio, it's a way to build on work that the student is doing in one kind of activity or another of the sort that you were just mentioning. And so I think that's where it has the biggest impact. It's pretty tough to do, and in my experience, I seldom saw um, a kind of standalone program that would be, or not even a program is the wrong word, standalone utilization that
Mhm.
would be put into place, say, by a specific English professor or a specific history professor.
Right.
That takes a tremendous effort and on the part of the professor,
Right.
and commitment, and lots of planning, trial and error, and it's tough to do that on your own.
Yeah.
But if it's built into a degree program, or it's built into a departmental
Mhm.
effort that is encompassing a multi-section course, 15, 20, 30 sections of a
Mhm.
course,
Right.
then you've got the framework
Yeah.
that can really make it work much more efficiently. Um, and then allows people to sort of step up and step forward. And it can also, make up in a sense for the the pieces of a program, or the people within a program who are not really stepping up. Um, it's as I said before, it's a very portfolios are a complex um, type of pedagogy and institutional effort to
Right.
organize and to make successful.
Yeah. Which is interesting because you know, um, somehow whether you were drawn to it or they wanted your talents for it, all the institutions that you were involved with, at some point somehow you ended up making these larger systems, larger program drives,
Mm,
um, to make these things work. And it's not really just portfolio. I would say it'd be really kind of like you was describing in LaGuardia. You were really looking at professional development in a very holistic way, and portfolio being a component of it. But you are free to use all kinds of different tools and tricks and different
mhm,
ways to engage people, and that just happens to be one of the things that you use as a tool. But that's actually a really insightful um, way to think about for people that, because I see a lot of people that talk to me now and say, hey, we're trying to launch portfolio at a school, and I find myself always looking at like patterns like yours, trying to get some pattern recognition here, have this many years. And I find that the patterns look a lot like that, which is more like, well, what type of initiatives, what type of big things are you doing at the school, that is meaningful to people, that are engaging people, whether it be at the faculty level, student level. It really, it doesn't matter, because it could be, like you said, a faculty professional development, but it could also have been a first year experience, which is a new part piece of the curriculum.
mhm,
um, but you can use it as that amplifier, or as that place to sort of, you know enhance the engagement that you have to do anyway. You have to
mhm.
engage them in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, yeah, and
um,
it's and the other piece the the process that I certainly saw again and again is the jump that the faculty need to make, the conceptual jump.
mhm,
Now, for some people, it's not that difficult to do. Um, the idea of student-centered learning, the idea of active learning, the idea of experiential learning, all of those are not new,
mhm,
and they all had a kind of genesis uh, apart from the availability of an electronic portfolio, but they
mhm,
all fit. The portfolio fits very well as an amplifier of those kinds of learning.
right,
uh, and it's up to the faculty really to be able to make that integration work, to make the the bringing together of a a particular kind of pedagogy with that tool, with the technology that's then available. It's very similar to the kinds of conceptual jumps that are needed to teach online, or to teach well online. It's not
mhm,
that different. Um, you have to give up something in order to put that kind of agency into the hands of students.
mhm,
And there are certainly no there's a lot of folks who get that, who understand it, and
yeah,
those tend to be the people who are able to grasp the potential of a portfolio for a student and are able to run with it.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. So Let's talk about professional development for a little bit because that
Mhm,
became something that you. I feel like that maybe you're right. Like as we met, you were sort of having sort of both roles. You were both in the classroom, but you're also doing
mhm,
administration. But it almost
mhm.
feels like that a lot of the administrative parts became a large part of your interests in the latter part of your career. And in how many years have you been in community colleges?
Well, I started at Bronx in 1998, so it was 23 years, something like that. Um, I started on the
Yeah.
faculty at Bronx in 98,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it wasn't really until
Yeah.
about 9 years or so later that I began to kind of put one foot into administrative tasks.
Right. Right.
And then I was doing that kind of straddling act for a couple of years
Hmm.
um, before I kind of went fully into administration.
Yeah.
And professional development was, in a sense, the entry point for me, which
Hmm.
is a little bit unusual. I don't know that that's the that common a kind of a path for people to take from the faculty side to
Hmm.
administrative work. I was never a department chairperson, uh, which is the more common kind
Hmm.
of route. Just as things unfolded, that just never happened. I probably would have had I stayed in the faculty, but I didn't do that. And there were times where I felt that that was a little bit of a disadvantage for me because that's the real boots on the ground administration is department chairpersons, department chairs.
Right. You're dealing
Um,
with the real fire that you are the first line of defense, isn't it?
Absolutely. If there's a
Yeah.
problem with students, you're the one who hears about it. If there's a problem with a faculty member, you're the first one to get it.
Right.
Then sometimes you got to kick it upstairs, uh, but it's department chairs that really do that every day.
Hmm.
Um, and and I never got that. I never had that experience, so I had to wing it.
I don't know. I hear a lot of people that, a faculty that sort of rotate into that position, and it also could have made it so that you wouldn't like it, and then you
It's
just
very,
kind of
it's very possible.
right,
It's
right.
very possible.
So I've seen
Well,
like
it's because
we know a few people,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
in our circles that are like, no, no way, I'm never gonna do that again, right?
It's because it's a very tough position because
Yeah,
it's a kind of a middle management job,
yeah,
as are deanships basically, but with a with in a different part of the structure.
yeah.
And so, you have a certain scope as a department chair to guide the ship in a certain direction, but it's not a very substantial scope because you've got the dean breathing down your neck and telling you you got to do X, Y, or Z,
Right.
and the provost is breathing down the neck of the dean, and you're the one as the chair who has to execute while
Right.
negotiating all the people in your department who can't stand the dean or who love the
Right.
provost but hate you.
Right.
It's just
Right. Right.
it's
Right.
all
In every
this is the
direction,
game. This is the game.
yeah, you're kind of like the punching bag from all sides. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, right. I think a lot of people don't survive that, so maybe it's a
Well,
good
but then
thing
there
that
well,
you didn't do it.
maybe, but there are also other people who end up doing it for 30 years, you
Right.
know? There are
It's
plenty
true.
of them too.
Hmm.
So
So, so let me ask you this then. We didn't talk about Guttman yet,
mhm,
which is when you went there as a provost.
right.
And you had a previous, stint at Bronx as an interim provost
Mhm.
prior to that. And so what was that like? I mean, you were asked to go and be a provost at this college. And we should tell people a little bit about Gutman.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and maybe just to contrast these three institutions, right?
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. So Guttman is the newest undergraduate college in CUNY. It opened the doors in 2012. It was the product of several years of work, planning work, that actually began maybe around 2007 or 8, and I was actually involved at the very very early stages of that planning, but I had to give it up because it literally required me to leave the Bronx campus, come into Midtown Manhattan, and spend several hours, and it was difficult for me to do my job at BCC and stay engaged with that work. So I bowed out of that. But I sort of knew about what was happening there at the very beginning. And in essence, it was an attempt by the university, the then chancellor of the university, Matthew Goldstein, to create a new model of a community college that would address some of the challenges that had become very, very clear. Uh, Primarily the challenge of completion, that so many community college students enter but never finish, and that there's a social cost. We all pay for that, in addition to the personal cost
Mm.
that's paid by the student who enters hoping to earn a degree but never does. So Guttman was constructed with the idea that it would be put together so that completion would become more possible for the students who came to the college. That
Mhm.
was the goal. And so it was set up with a very particular structure. And, we can talk about some of the aspects of that. Um, it would take a while to cover all of it because it really was a new model of an institution,
Yeah, yeah.
based on what the research was showing at that time. Again, about 15 years ago, 13, 14, 15 years ago. Um, when I arrived there, it was the spring of 2017, April of 2017. So the college had been in place for about 5 years at that point. Um, I was the fourth provost in 5 years. So, and as I've said on a couple of occasions, I might have paid closer attention to that fact than I did. Um, there were problems in the initial startup, and
Mhm.
and uh, I was aware of some of them, but not other aspects of it. And it wasn't really until I arrived there that I began to learn uh, how that structure was working, what pieces of it were successful, what pieces of it were not, and that would then really need to change for the institution to prosper.
Right.
Um, so I was coming into that chief academic officer role in a very unusual place, not at all like a traditional college, uh, not at all a traditional college structure. Just as a kind of starting point, there are no academic departments at Guttman. There will be. Um,
Mhm.
at some point, I stopped working there last summer in August. So prior to that, uh, over really almost the entire previous academic year, so the 2021 academic year, we had started with the faculty a process to create academic departments. Um, and that is going to go forward. It hasn't been done yet. It's a complicated kind of thing to do
Mhm.
institutionally,
Mhm.
got all kinds of ramifications, and it'll happen eventually. But it was something that I began to perceive as a need,
Mhm.
and it took a while after I was there before we were able to begin to try to push to make that happen.
Right, right.
Um,
So, uh,
by the way, the faculty really wanted it. They wanted it from the
mhm,
beginning, but
sure.
there was kind of there were objections to that, to establishing departments, which were based on the original concept of how the college was supposed to be organized and how departments can interfere with certain kinds of innovations,
Mhm.
primarily.
Right,
Excuse me.
right. Interesting. And I think it's important for people who don't know about Gutman to know that CUNY, the City University of New York, is a big organization with almost what A quarter million to 300,000
Yeah,
students.
yeah, I don't know what the numbers are now. I mean,
Yeah,
everybody's struggling with enrollment, but yeah, I
it's
mean,
something in that
until
range,
the
right?
prior to the pandemic, it was in the range of 250, 260,000 undergraduates in I believe 23 undergraduate colleges. No, I'm losing track of the numbers now. Anyway, between the undergraduate colleges and the graduate programs and the professional schools, there's about 24, 25 units
Yeah,
in the college, in the university. So it's,
right.
yes, an enormous system.
It's a
Very, very
big
big.
system. It's got a very deep uh, branches of control and management, all the way from sort of the CUNY sort of chancellor down to each
Hmm.
university or each
Yeah.
campus,
Hmm.
and Guttman being a brand new, newly conceived idea. And there was probably a lot of pressure on you as well, because every school's looking at it and saying, "Well, we've been around for a while. We have, tens of thousands of students. You are the new kid on the block, literally, right? You got a sweet space right in the Midtown Manhattan, and how are you going to fare, right? We're going to,
Yeah. There's no doubt that there was a lot of scrutiny,
yeah,
and there was a lot of kind of raised eyebrows
mhm.
or squinting, what's going on what's going on at that place over there? And,
Right,
I
right.
mean, this kind of maybe takes us off in a slightly different direction, but part of the conundrum with Gutman is the size. It's
Hmm.
a small place. When
Hmm.
I was there for the bulk of the time I was there, we hovered around 1,000 head count,
Right.
and a little bit more, 1,100 maybe,
Yeah.
and that's tiny by CUNY
Right.
standards.
Right.
My
And you
other
have but you also have a space limit. You have all kinds of
Well,
other limitations you're working with.
this was the dilemma, is that
Yeah.
we were constrained by that space. We
Hmm.
couldn't fit any more students in.
Right.
Um, there was, the possibility of doing more things on the weekend, more things at night, but
Right.
then there was a curriculum that did not make it easy to do that,
Right.
because it was a very lockstep curriculum where all entering
Mhm.
students
Right.
were expected to do exactly the same kind of program. So
Hmm.
you couldn't have part-time students.
Hmm.
Um, the college did not accept transfers.
Hmm.
So there were built-in constraints to growth, and that's a real problem that the
Right.
college was
Right.
facing all along. It became a really acute problem
Right.
while I was there, and I know that the folks who are there now are still pushing to solve the problem.
But they have to deal. Yeah. Right. Sure. But I do want to just sort of step back, from the scrutiny that you were getting, and the attention that you were drawing, to just point out that at least CUNY as an institution is trying something new. It's not like they tried something new already 5 years before. They hadn't tried something new for a long time. Am I
No,
right?
it was a radical move,
Yeah.
without a doubt. The chancellor at the time said, "I'm looking at the community colleges. I see this really severe problem of
Hmm.
attrition.
Right.
How can we fix it?"
Right.
And then he appointed a group and said, "Do the research and come back with a plan to
Right.
create a brand new college
Hmm.
that will address this problem." So that
Right.
was a very radical move,
Yeah.
without a
And
doubt.
you were given the ability to do things like what you said. Let's have no academic department to start.
Right, right.
Let's have, no part-time students. For community college, that was a bold ask, right?
Is very much so. I mean, the other, another difference between Gutman and virtually all other community colleges is that it has never had a continuing education unit,
Mhm.
which are very important in the function and the purpose of community colleges.
Mhm.
Um, Gutman was conceived from the beginning as an undergraduate college that
Right.
would enroll full-time students.
Right.
And just as a point of comparison, LaGuardia, where I worked for 4 years, has an enormous continuing ed
Right.
unit, which is important for thousands and thousands of people who
Right.
receive credentials, get retraining,
Right. Right.
learn new skills, and not incidentally, it's an important part of the financial structure of community colleges.
Right, and the fabric of where higher education sort of stands in a
Yeah,
community like that.
yeah.
And I mean, I I don't know. I mean, I certainly am not the one to judge its success or failure, if any. But I do applaud the willingness to try. And in some sense, um, and perhaps that's to challenge the definition of the community colleges altogether, which as a open enrollment, low cost place for people to have an undergraduate um, degree, whether it's just a 2 year degree or eventually getting to a 4 year degree. it there might be a place for that, and we just haven't seen it. We haven't really been experiencing that, right? um, so I think that it's probably worth thinking about.
Well, it's more than that. I mean, it
Yeah.
was, as I said, it was a very radical act to
Yeah.
create this place. And I felt in during my tenure there that we were kind of moving from startup to whatever the next phase is,
Hmm.
whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
The startup phase was over, and
Right. Well, you were
um,
also professionalizing it and turning into a functioning institution. You have to
well,
do that as well. Not that it was dysfunctional before. It's just
no, there were
they're as a
right. I
new
mean,
school.
it,
Yeah.
and it was a that transition from startup to the next phase
Hmm.
necessitates that you look at what you're doing, that you really
Right.
examine the
Hmm.
structures, the outcomes, the data,
Hmm.
and make some decisions about what is working well in the interests of students and what isn't.
Hmm. Right.
And that was a lot of what I was grappling with for four
Yeah.
years, and it was pretty challenging because
Yeah.
there were folks there who were very, very committed, almost ideologically committed to
Hmm.
what the original structure had been. But there were
Hmm.
aspects of that that clearly did not work
Right.
and had to change for the college to prosper and for
Right.
students to be successful.
Right.
And so that was part of the job, and it's part of the job for my successor
Yeah.
for
And I
sure.
and I feel like that's really why they needed someone like you who's willing to be critical about what it has done, right? So that you are not just look. I feel like that you certainly recognize the opportunities and the promise something this kind of opportunity gives you, right? The
Hmm.
ability to go ahead and say basically build a brand new structure. What a sort of like a dream job, fun job for any sort of education administrators, to be
Yeah,
able to say, oh,
yeah,
I can just go blue sky on this, right?
mm, yeah.
um,
Well,
um,
that was, I
yeah.
mean, the interesting thing is that was not when I got there. Uh, when I got there, that period really was ending.
Hmm.
Um, Not everyone there recognized that it was ending at that moment.
Hmm.
But again, I'll go back to what I said before. I was provost number 4 in
Hmm.
5 years.
Right.
So there were some seams in there that were kind of starting to crack a little bit,
Right.
and
Right.
so that was simply part of the environment that I walked into, that I inherited, and
Hmm.
uh, there were good days and not so good days.
This concludes part one of our conversation with Howard Wach from Guttman Community College. To hear part two, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Digication Scholars Conversations is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative ePortfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. This episode was produced by Jeff Yan and Drew Albanesius. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching.